It's an education battle, and it's big enough that the White House sent the vice president to Jacksonville. We are examining the new and controversial standards from the Florida Board of Education. Plus, a local lawmaker makes an impact on black farmers in the state, what Tracy Davis did that connects to medical marijuana. And it's the biggest private donation to Jacksonville's Emerald Trail. Internationally known Swisher signs over $500,000. We'll explain why on This Week in Jacksonville. Great to have you today. A busy week in and around Northeast Florida. Lots to discuss. Local government law attorney Chris Hand joins us for our monthly Hand on Government segment. So, Chris, let's start here. The recent announcement by Florida Department of Education specific to teaching African American history. This has been controversial, to say the least.
Well, Ken, it is. And remember the context here as to what's happened over the last several years that's related to education in Florida. You had a situation where a couple of years ago, the legislature passed the so-called anti-woke law, which impacted to some extent subjects that could be taught in public schools. Also passed legislation related to higher education, eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and also having some impact on subjects. The state of Florida has so far not approved the use of the advanced placement African American history course in high schools in Florida. And of course, there's also been a lot of discussion about how textbooks may have been changed or been removed from shelves. So there's a lot of context right now to the subject of teaching black history. The most recent one, of course, is these new education standards. Just for background, periodically the Florida Department of Education reviews and decides whether to make changes or stay the same with educational standards for different subjects. The big controversy in the last couple of weeks has been the changes in black history, one of which suggested that there were some benefits for slavery, people being able to find job skills later in life. Of course, that's been hugely controversial. Slavery, a dehumanizing practice where people were removed against their will from their homes and brought involuntarily to the United States, subject to violence. So understandably, that's been a very controversial subject. That then was extended when the governor, during a campaign swing, seemed to defend the education changes, that, you know, the idea that there were some benefits to slavery. So the story has lasted a good chunk of time because of not only the standards, but also the governor's response to it. And there has been pushback, not just in Florida, not just locally, but of course around the country to that very controversial standard.
And there was a national figure that was here on that topic. It's been just over a week, but Vice President Kamala Harris flew into Jacksonville, then spoke at the Ritz Theater in La Villa. So, Chris, her message was pretty clear. She does not support these standards. She didn't mention the Florida governor by name, but she had pretty pointed words. Obvious that it was directed towards him and these standards, right?
Well, and it's not just been sort of one party or the other that's had a negative reaction to these proposed standards, Kent. I mean, just in the last several days, U.S. Congressman Byron Donalds from Southwest Florida has spoken out against this particular language in the standards. And, you know, the sort of slavery benefits piece is just one controversial aspect about these standards. There are others as well that have sort of generated this national reaction, again, not just by people of the opposite political party, but in a very bipartisan way.
What is wrong with having a broader conversation? I may not agree with your perspective, but it seems like these efforts, and you just detailed them at the beginning of our conversation here, seems like these efforts are designed to really squeeze into kind of a narrow lane what can be discussed when it comes to history or even society, and it seems to be kind of centered around race.
Well, that's right, Ken. I think a lot of the concern is focused on the fact that there's a lot of aspects of black history in particular that the state seems to be restricting in terms of what students can learn, what teachers can teach, both in the public schools and at the university level, while at the same time promulgating historical theories that really don't square with the facts. So, for example, this idea that slavery somehow conferred benefits, the governor, I think, used the term, you know, former slaves could parlay their experience into future, work benefits in life. Well, obviously, that doesn't square with the history of this abhorrent practice, one of the greatest crimes in the history of the United States, where, again, people were subjugated, moved involuntarily for their homes to this country, subject in many cases to violence and, other sort of horrible situations. So I think the concern is a dual concern. On the one hand, that certain aspects of black history are being restricted and not allowed to be taught. And on the other hand, particularly with these new standards, there are aspects of black history history that don't square with the facts that are now being included in the Florida curriculum standards.
Let's talk about Florida's governor here, the DeSantis for President movement. I mean, it was really kind of the worst kept secret in the state for that year before he announced. But since Ron DeSantis officially announced his candidacy for president, things have not gone smoothly. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. And, you know, Kent, we've seen this in several presidential election cycles, that there's a candidate early on who seems to have a lot of resources, some potential support, where it really doesn't pan out when the actual campaign started. In the 2012 election cycle, that was Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who was generally seen as one of the favorites. He had a lot of resources. That campaign was ultimately not successful. In 2016, that was former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who had raised a ton of money, but ultimately didn't have a successful campaign. At least so far, and I think it's important to note, we are still 6 months from the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. But at least in this early stages of the contest, Governor DeSantis, while having a lot of resources, while having some momentum coming out of the 2022 elections, that has not yet translated to a successful campaign. In some of those early states, there was new polling just this last week. In some of those early states like Iowa and South Carolina, former President Trump is leading the entire field, including Governor DeSantis, by 30 points or more. Republican primary voters across the country are now saying they believe that former President Trump, as opposed to Governor DeSantis, is the more electable of the two candidates. And in some places, in this most recent poll in South Carolina, Governor DeSantis has now fallen to third in the Republican primary polling. And of course, it's also been highly publicized. They've made cuts to staff. They're having to sort of rein in spending and those sorts of matters as well. So again, not the way most presidential campaigns want to begin. And I think it is making it more challenging for the DeSantis campaign to frame up the contest in the way they want to. They have long wanted to frame this up as a one-on-one contest between he and former President Trump. That's becoming increasingly difficult given the large lead that former President Trump has. As we sit here today, and again, there's a lot of time left until Republican voters start voting, but as we sit here today, it certainly seems like Republican primary voters across the country want to nominate the same candidate they did in 2016 and 2020, that being former President Trump. But of course, we'll have to see what happens over the next 6 months.
So President Trump, we've detailed this in previous episodes on the show here, so we won't go there today, but clearly there's some legal challenges that he faces. What about President Biden? Clearly the expected nominee for the Democrats since he's the sitting president here. But this issue with his son, and just this last week, Hunter Biden had a plea deal. It fell through. That seems to be something that could, at the very least, be a distraction for President Biden in running for re-election.
Well, it's certainly, and that I think what has actually happened with the plea deal is that it's been postponed as they, I think, attempt to see if they can kind of bring that back together. But there's no question. I mean, certainly the Republicans are going to make Hunter Biden an issue. They've done that previously, tried to do that in the last campaign. There's no question they'll try to do it in the next one. As you say, President Biden, that doesn't really become as much of an issue until the general election, in the sense that, you know, the Democratic primary likely more or less settled at this point. President Biden does have some people running against him, but not people who are expected to defeat him for the nomination. But you can certainly imagine that this issue, as opposed, in addition to others, will continue to come up as the campaign moves forward.
Yeah. So we're going to move forward, and Chris is going to stay with us. Chris, I appreciate it. We're going to dive into a couple more areas. They include the impact of the state's insurance crisis. We'll talk about that. And we'll dig into how Senator Tracy Davis from Jacksonville stepped in to make an impact for black farmers. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And with Chris Hand, as we do our Hand on Government segment, we do this once a month. Chris Hand, government law attorney, but you've got so much experience at the local level, the state level, the federal level. Let's talk a little bit about a local lawmaker, Tracy Davis, the state senator. She spent time in the House, now a state senator, and something that she supported legislatively, making a difference when it comes to black farmers and medical marijuana. Help us understand that.
Well, Ken, as you may remember, back in 2017, the Florida legislature authorized medical marijuana here in the state and set up a system with the Florida state government for people to apply for medical marijuana licenses to grow and distribute medical marijuana. And that legislation set up a variety of requirements who licenses could go to. As the result of some past litigation involving kind of concerns about discriminatory practices in agriculture regulation, some of those licenses were supposed to go specifically to black farmers. Well, over the course of the 6 years since the legislature approved that medical marijuana regulatory scheme, there had been a delay in awarding those licenses. So some leaders around the state, especially Senator Davis, stepped forward during the last several legislative sessions to try and address this issue. In the 2023 legislative session, the legislature passed a bill that would help address this problem. And just in the last week or so, those initial licenses have been awarded, and there may be more in the future as well.
So in that first handful of years, how many black farmers had been licensed for medical marijuana?
I don't think any had been licensed, right? Zero, right. And so now, and that's been part of the reason Senator Davis and others in the legislature stepped in to help make sure that language that's in the Florida statutes requiring that licenses be issued to black farmers, they stepped in to make sure that aspect of the regulatory system in Florida was implemented correctly. That has begun to happen now, but the direct result of leadership of one of the members of the Duval County legislative delegation, Senator Tracy Davis.
So let's shift to some more legislative news. So we saw special sessions happen in the last year plus. Chris, last week we had Florida Speaker of the House Paul Renner on to discuss specifically what's happening in the property insurance crisis. It is a crisis here in Florida. Speaker Renner certainly went into the causes, but we know farmers insurance pulled out. AAA announced that it's reducing its presence as well. And then I think there's probably a ripple effect that we can talk about happening when it can, you see these companies continuing to leave Florida, a ripple effect that even affects property values or the housing market, right?
Well, there's no question about it, Kent. Look, anyone who owns a house knows that the cost of purchasing the house is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the expenses that go along with it. And a major expense for everybody is the cost of homeowners insurance, which has obviously been increasing substantially. Anyone who's opened their policy renewal notice over the last couple of years has seen one trend in common. It's increasing, the amount they're having to pay for insurance. And at the same time, premiums are going up, which is often a reflection of how insurance companies see their risk in the state. The number of options is going down. There have been a number of companies that have gone insolvent over the last couple of years. And as you say, some others, like Farmers and AAA, that are actually leaving the state in terms of the coverage they offer there. That often forces members of homeowners around the state to, if they can, get policies through Citizens Property Insurance, which is the state-run insurer of last resort in the state, or have to scramble to find other coverage. And when they do find that coverage, it often tends to be quite expensive. So this is a major crisis in the state. As you say, there have been a couple of special sessions to try and address this, but the impacts of those special sessions do not seem to have actually reached the consumer level yet. We'll have to see what happens over time, but right now this is making it difficult for people to, I think, to move to the state. And as we've seen in numerous media accounts, people who live here right now are starting to feel priced out of the state. Sure. And as we say, this is on top of what is an affordable or attainable housing crisis in the state of Florida, where people already feel like they can't afford the underlying cost of a home. Now you add these extra expenses like insurance or putting on a new roof or those kinds of things as well. And it really gets to a point where people are asking, can we still afford to live in the state of Florida?
Yeah. So in the last decade, I moved to Florida in 2010, and for the first couple of years, we didn't have direct impact of hurricanes and all these costs that are associated with a natural disaster like that. Governor DeSantis, his comments recently were, well, basically, cross your fingers, hope that there's not a hurricane this year, and maybe it'll help us recover a little bit. There's something to that, but that doesn't relieve the pressure now? And just what you said a moment ago, legislatively, there's been some changes, but it hasn't trickled down to those of us who are homeowners yet.
Well, there's an old saying, of course, that hope really isn't a strategy. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that lawmakers across the state are really going to have to evaluate is the changes that were made in past legislative sessions, how quickly are they likely to show some benefit? Obviously, people who are struggling to pay homeowners premiums, they don't need help at some undetermined time in the future. They need help now. So it's always a constant process of evaluating, have the policy changes that have been made, will they have an impact, or is there some additional step that needs to be taken now? So we'll have to watch this. Of course, we've had the exacerbating condition this year in Florida of these record heat temperatures. July is, you know, set to be the hottest month on record on the planet Earth, which obviously exacerbates some of these issues. So we'll have to see if the governor and the legislature and others look to take some additional action as we move into the latter parts of the summer.
Chris, I appreciate it. I love, again, once a month we do Hand on Government and get to hear some of your insights. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ken.
All right, so they've made the largest private investment for the Emerald Trail in Jacksonville. Up next, we're talking with Swisher about the gift and the commitment to groundwork Jacksonville. Stay with us on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
There's a lot of excitement in Jacksonville surrounding the Emerald Trail. The plan is for trails, greenways, parks that all encircle the urban core linking historic neighborhoods. Organizers say it has the potential to be a catalyst for social and economic development in Jacksonville. So joining us right now, Chris Howard, one of the executives at Swisher. Chris, the largest private donation that's been made so far, and it comes from your company, so help people understand, hey, this is a $500,000 commitment, $500,000. Why is this important for Swisher?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an exciting time, not just for the community in Jacksonville and Swisher, and obviously we wanted to be part of that. I mean, Swisher is based right in Springfield, one of the 14 neighborhoods connected by the Emerald Trail, and so it's important for us to help that neighborhood along with the rest of the city. It's good for our employees and their families who work in the area, and of course it's good for the neighborhoods themselves. So we're pretty excited to be a part of it. In fact, you know, for us, obviously we live here in Jacksonville, most of us do, and we work here. So we recognize that at times, cities like this, they need revitalization. And so Swisher, this year in particular, we put this plan together for our community engagement. I mean, we've always been a very philanthropic company. I think you probably know this. This year we've made a commitment internally to give $1 million in total to various causes throughout the area. We kind of put those in four separate buckets, and I'll just run through those. First one is our nation's heroes, veterans and their families and that sort of thing. So we've got several initiatives underway there. Another is higher education. It's important to us, you know, trying to facilitate higher education. We have partnerships with JU and some other institutions as well. Of course, community revitalization is a big one. That's what the Emerald Trail is all about, and also the health aspect, the health and community piece. So with revitalization, it's important to us. It's one of our tenets, and donating $500,000 was really a no-brainer for the company.
So we'll show you some of this. We know there are going to be 30 miles of trails, greenways, and parks. And we've got not just a map, but we've also got kind of a rendering of what this might look like. 14 neighborhoods connecting through downtown. Hogan's Creek, McCoy's Creek, St. John's River. So this is the just the Model Mile Park Street Bridge that we're looking at a rendering here. Chris, how does this promote economic and social development, at least in your view?
Sure, and let me tell you, I personally have been out on the trail with the CEO of Groundworks Jacksonville, Kay Ehas, and it was a fantastic experience. I've certainly watched the model, like our viewers are watching now, but I tell you, it really does it some even more justice when you get a chance to go out on the trail and see the pieces in development, understand how the 30 miles, you know, connects so many things together. And in addition to the schools and the neighborhoods and all that, there's parks coming in, and all. It's really going to be tremendous. And so to answer your question, I mean, how does it make a difference? Well, look, I know when I came here 8 years ago today, believe it or not, 7 years ago today, when I came here, I remember people said, you know, if you live at the beach, you're going to stay at the beach. You know, we're beach people, they used to say. And I tell you, I think those days are over. I mean, this trail was going to bring a whole new life to downtown Jacksonville. It's going to turn it into a destination. And those beach people are going to be dying to come down to Jacksonville and hang out and run the half marathon on the trail, take their kids to the parks, enjoy some of the other activities associated around arts and entertainment and that sort of thing. I think this is a first step, and there's a lot of big things to come in downtown Jacksonville and in surrounding areas. And as far as revitalization goes, I feel like we're really on the right track.
Chris, how did Swisher get involved, and maybe what was the connection where half of your budget for philanthropy says one project? We're going to put it here.
No, I know it sounds like a lot, that's for sure, and it is. And so Swisher, believe it or not, has been in Jacksonville for 99 years. Next year, the company, yeah, it's insane. The company is actually 160 years old. Moved to Jacksonville 99 years ago. That means next year is our big centennial. So it's we have been here a long time, and we have no plans to go anywhere. And despite the fact that we're a pretty big company, I mean, and we obviously have the capability to make donations like this and to make a difference, I feel like. And we seem, I mean, we're obviously international. It's still family owned. And when I say it's family owned, I mean it is literally family owned. The family's on the board and very active in terms of our presence. And the family supports the employees and their families. And so when you take it to the next level, what makes sense? The family and leadership wants to support initiatives that help their employees and help the neighborhoods in which we live. And so Swisher, having been here for that long, it wouldn't make sense if we donated $500,000 to a different city, that's for sure. So this was an easy choice for us, and management fully aligned on this.
It's clearly something that's going to make a difference for this project, and the hope certainly for this project that's going to make a difference in Jacksonville. Chris Howard from Swisher, thank you so much for your time.
No, happy to be here. Thank you.
So we've got a great show lined up for next weekend, too. New City Council member Ken Amaro is going to join us. We're unpacking a unique international study on water, which includes UNF, and we're getting ready for back to school. We're going to explain the Duval Ready Diploma program. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17. And then you find us online at news4jax.com or streaming on News4Jax Plus. And be sure to subscribe to my weekly This Week in Jacksonville newsletter. It's a real bonus for News4Jax insiders. Head to news4jax.com/newsletters, then click to sign up under This Week in Jacksonville.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.